All right, so since everybody's had the chance to take the quiz, I'm going to go ahead and, let's see, how bad does that, it just looks dark, that's all. Okay, so I'm going to go and, I forgot the hookup for a laptop, but some quick thinking and downloading of stuff, and I think I'll be able to do this just fine. The only thing is I gotta make sure to upload the video from this computer once I'm done with the lecture. So let me just double check that I'm recording this. It does say I'm recording it. Because this isn't going to be too bad because I'm not actually going to be writing anything or going through the slides necessarily yet because I know a lot of you are feeling anxious about the exam. So what we do in exam, a review of the practice exam. So first thing, just a couple things I want to go over. I probably won't necessarily include problems like, I'll come back to section 2, code reading, with these two problems because they happen to do with objects, which we only just covered. So I'm probably not necessarily going to put them into the, problems like that is into the exam. But those are pretty easy to check your answer because you just copy and paste this source code into your editor. Yes? Minimal stuff like the concepts over here, maybe. I'm not feeling confident about what you guys have learned so far. Yeah, like this one. Like, what is an object? Let me see what I've got already on my other exam. Sorry, from the problems I already have written. But mostly it's going to be coding about stuff. Yeah, concepts like something that we might have learned like on Monday, like asking, hey, what is this? What does, why is, what is the this keyword, literally? Like questions like that might be on there, but nothing that's going to be required to program. Yeah, that's what it looks. Yeah. So the code reading stuff over here, this might be good stuff for when you're going to practice for the final exam, but for right now, a bit hands off on that stuff. All right. So what is a return type? And a couple other things to note, right? 105 points. There's going to be a lot of pages, but that's simply because I like to give you guys plenty of space. Probably going to not be as many problems as there are on the practice exam, just simply because that's a lot of writing to do. But I have to basically make a trade-off between, problems and the amount of points that each problem is worth. Math is never really that complicated. Read the exam because I might have hints on there in the directions. Remember these functions, right? I'll list all the functions you need to know. Like on the actual exam, I have a note that using dot equals is what you use to compare two things that are objects like strings. And double equals is when you want to compare, well, we'll get into that in just a second. So what is a return type and what different types of return types are there? Sorry? Yeah, there's the types of values that get returned. And it's kind of a silly, it's one of those like self-obvious questions once it really can't be that easy kind of questions. It's not a trick question here. Basically, any primitive and any object can be a return type, right? Also, void, right? Those are the return types, right? It's what the return type is. Is basically what it's the part of the method that tells the user what you're going to return, and what kind of different return types are there? Well, there's as many as there are objects, and so any object, any primitive, and void, which means we return nothing. So what happens when you use double equals? So equals to compare two objects. Yeah. That's exactly right. You're not necessarily going to get false, right? Because if they have the same memory location, you're going to get true. But that second part is exactly right. That when you use double equals, right, you're comparing what's actually inside the variables for objects. And what are inside the variables for objects? A memory location. That's what's inside the variable. That's what gets stored inside the variable and memory location. This is what we call a reference, okay? In C, we call them pointers. And the distinction is that pointers, and as far as I understand what the distinction is, pointers, you have to manually dereference them, meaning you have to manually take that memory location and turn it into the value you want. And for a reference, Java automatically does that for you. Okay. What is an object? Kind of a tough question there, but it's like, geez, they're like so much, right? But really what they are here, I mean, that's something you might want to look up in your textbook or in the slides, but essentially objects are collections, is a collection of data and behaviors that the data can perform. Basically, it's all the adjectives. So if your object is a noun, then its fields are their adjectives that describe that noun, and the methods are the verbs that noun can perform. If that makes it, that's one way to look at it. But it's otherwise it's just an organizational unit. It's a way to organize a bunch of data together and the things that data can do. Okay, so I'm going to skip the code reading and jump into the exciting part of this, which is the bulk of the points, which is the code writing. So definitely expect a 10-point question on something along the lines of this, right? And this should be something that you got similar from the home. That this looks like something you had to do in the homework. Suppose you have a file named numbers.txt, which contains a bunch of integers, one per line. You don't know how many lines or numbers are in it. Okay, so write code below that will open the file, read the numbers from it, and print the sum of all the even numbers. Okay? Yes. Excellent question. I said it contains a bunch of integers, so and I would tell you on the exam, just assume it has just integers, only integers, and one per line. Basically, you don't have to worry about spaces or anything like that, right? It's just integers and one integer per line. So you could do read line and then turn that line into an integer, or you could do next int the entire way down. Okay, either way it works. Okay, so write code that will open the file, read the numbers from it, and print the sum of all the even numbers. So public static void, because this is a print, because I said to do this as a print, right? And you wouldn't need to write a method for this. I just simply said write code that does this. I never have you actually have to write the method header unless I explicitly tell you to do so, right? For all the other problems, I already gave you the method, right, to write inside of, so there wouldn't be any extra confusion. So you never have to write a method yourself. So read evens, right? And we're given this file name, so let's go ahead and do. So our file is equal to a new. So it's going to look something like this: new file. And if you forget this part, that's like a minor mistake, right? The file part of it. So read file, new file, numbers.txt. That's not something I'll be too upset about, but it will be like a point or two there. And then scanner. Scanner is equal to new scanner. And then you don't read from system.in, you read from the file. Now, you may remember from having to do this that your computer will say, hey, there's an exception there for a file not found exception. If you remember that occurs, and you handle it or you mention it, that's extra credit, right? That's beyond what I expect you to remember, right? So if we wanted the extra credit, we might make this a method and say it throws a file not found exception over there, or we might put in a try catch block, which is something you would have had to read up on yourself, because I teach it at the end of the semester because it takes about a half an hour. And I figure that's something much better suited for the end of the semester. Okay, file is equal to a new file. Scanner is equal to a new scanner. Okay, so now we need to read. We don't know how big the file is, so we need to read lines from it. Because we don't know how long we'll be reading for, we need to use a while loop, right? An indeterminate loop. So while scanner dot has next line, right? And what I'll do is I'll do string. What I like to do is always like to use next line as opposed to next int. String line is equal to scanner dot next line. And then we know every line is an integer, so I'll do int I is equal to integer dot parse int line. And then what we needed to do here was, right, we wanted, so now I've read every single line, right? And what the overall, and that's actually a lot of points there. The overall objective, of course, is that I want to add all the even numbers and print them out, so I need a running sum. So int sum is equal to 0. Okay. So if I mod 2 equals 0, and the version you'll have on the test is something a bit easier than this, right? I always like to try to make some problems a bit harder on the exam, on the practice exam. So string line, read the line, parse the integer, get it, and then if it's even, sum plus equals I, and then when you're done, system.out.println. And on the exam, if you're just, because system.out.println is quite a lot. If you write print, I'll accept that. Or if you do sout, s-out, I'll understand that you mean standard out, and that's fine. You can do that there too, right? Just as an abbreviation. Yes. They do, but they should know that that's a thing. And you, as always, you can always write, if you're worried, you can write on your exam, like at the very beginning, S-out is an abbreviation for this, right? If you're always worried, you can add that to your exam, and then they'll understand completely that basically that's your thing. And I might, yeah. So let's go ahead and, so I'll say sout, and now you'll have video evidence in case you need to get points back anyway. So that's that problem. That's a 10-point problem. It's not too bad. Okay, so other methods. So method writing. Here's the thing. Do not, in this section, do not use system.out.println unless you like losing points, right? I have that up there in bold because, right, these are going to be things that return things. So unless I explicitly tell you to print something, you're going to be returning something. So here you're returning an integer array, here you're returning a string, here you're returning a Boolean, here you're returning an integer, here you're returning an int, right? None of these require you to print anything out, right? So don't print anything out, don't use s-out here. So you won't need to, is the point. So range is something that I like that's from Python. So given an integer n, return an array of integers that contain the values 0 to n minus 1. So if I give you range 5, you're going to give me back 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I give you range 1, I'm going to give you 0. You can assume that n is greater than 0, right? We're going to generate at least you're not going to try to make a negative sized array, in other words, or a 0 sized array, right? Okay, so that one's not too bad. Okay, so now one of the things to note is that that you might just find at the beginning, hey, the values in each of the indices are equal to the indice. So that's going to make figuring out what values go in the array pretty easy, right? It's an array of integers containing the values 0 to n minus 1. So index 0 contains 0, index 1 contains 1, index 2 contains 2, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is make an array of size n, because I need to hold the values 0 to n minus 1, because that's a total of n values. So int r is equal to new int, and then you put however big you need it to be in there. So this needs to be size n. And then I'll just remember to return it at the end. Maybe I'll write it at the bottom of the page or something. Return r, okay? And then for each index in there, so for int I is equal to 0, I is less than r dot length I plus plus r I is equal to I. So take the I, and that's all this one is. This one's pretty simple. You put I, the value I, into the ith index, right? You put 0 and 0, 1 and 1. You put 2 in index 2. You put 3 in index 3 up until this is done, right? This one's a fairly simple one. Okay. I like this one because it goes back to, because you get, this was a callback to a homework you did on the Pig Latin. It requires kind of the same, it requires something similar to Pig Latin. If the string begins with un, return the string without un in the front. Otherwise, return the string with un added to the front of it. You can assume that the string is at least 3 characters long. So this allows you to assume that basically there is stuff there, and you know that you don't have to really check for errors. So for instance, untied becomes tied, unable becomes able, necessary becomes unnecessary. Okay? So first thing, so basically what we do depends on whether or not the string begins with un. So public static string un or un, and what was it called? It was str. String str. Okay. And now what do we do? We called. So first thing we have to figure out is, does the string begin with un? Okay, so that's an if statement. That's an if else, right? If else. Okay. All right. So the next thing we have to do is figure out, okay, can I tell if this begins with un? Well, if you happen to get bored one day and read the string API, which most of you probably haven't, there's a string dot starts with, or I believe, method in there, but you're probably not going to remember that or know that. But what you might know is that, okay, how can I check a part of the string? I can use substring, and I need to look at the first 2 characters of the string to figure this out. So, so I might do string first 2 is equal to substring. So I need to start from index 0, and I need to go up to, but I need to include, so it's all right, I need the character at index 0, the character at index 1, but not the character at index 2. So it's substring 0 to 2, right? And I'll have that, and I'll have the substring method listed in my actual exam in the help page, right? Just in case you forget it, I believe, or I should. I had it listed in this page, in here, yeah. I had it listed in here. So substring 0 to 2 will give you the first 2 characters. So if the first 2 characters dot equals un, then we know it begins with un. Okay, so if it begins with un, we want to remove the first 2 characters. So in that case, all we have to do is return str.substring 2. Now you see why I said it was like the Pig Latin one. So everything from character 2 on. Otherwise, we want to add the un to the beginning of the string if it doesn't begin with un. So we return un plus str. And that's all we need for that one. All right. I like this one. That's why, and this one's a bit tricky. It has a bit of a tricky edge case, which is why it has 7 points. So given an input string str, return string if the string contains cat in it, but the middle A can be any character. So kitty is false. Tomcat is true because it contains C-A-T, and catnip is true because it has C-4-T, right? The middle A can be any character. So if you think about this, what this means is I'm looking for a C, and then 2 characters later, it has a T, right? So this one is public static Boolean. So here, I just have to return true or false. Boolean wildcat string. So now let's figure out if this has a... So basically what we need to do is that we need to iterate through all the characters. So this is typically what I'll see. for int I is equal to 0, I is less than str.length. Now this will give you a mistake, but I'll get into that later. I++. I'll point out what that mistake is later. So we need to iterate through each character here, right? Because how do we know if it contains C blank T? Well, you could use regular expressions, but not most. But that's like overkill for this problem, and you don't necessarily know that. But what you really can do for this problem is you can let's see, you can iterate through each of the characters, right, until you find a C. And once you find a C, you can check, do two characters after that, does a T appear? And if so, return true, because it has a cat in it. Or it has the wildcat character. So, all right, if str.char@I equals C. So if that character is a C, then we have to check something else. And str.char@, now we have to look for the T, and that's going to occur 2 characters later. I plus 2 equals T. Well, then we've just shown that this has the wild cat character in it. So return true. Okay? All right. So now, and that's all we need. So if we go through, we find it has the C, and then we find 2 characters later it has a T, we return true. Otherwise, if we go through and we don't find that pattern at all, return false, right? So for these Boolean problems, typically what you want to do is assume either it has this or it doesn't have it, right? And that's going to be your default return statement. But as soon as you disprove that, you return the opposite. Like for instance, if I had a method like that checked if a string was made up of all capital letters, right? You'd go through you'd assume that it was made up of all capital letters until you found a lowercase character, in which case you could return false. Okay. So what is the minor error that I mentioned at the beginning? Well, the minor error is what if you go through and you get to a C at the end of the word, and then you try to check 2 characters after the end of the word, well, then you're going to have a bad time, right? You're going to have index out of bounds exception. So you can't go up. So you can't go beyond the string.length. So instead, we're going to have to do -2. So instead, what we're going to do is that we're going to check basically if we've got a word that looks like this. We're only going to iterate up to the C, because once we get to the C, we're going to check the E over here and see if that's a T, right? But say I had a C here, right? I don't want to go up to this point, because if I try to check 2 characters after that, I'll get an index out of bounds exception. So that's just a minor thing to remember if you ever have to look forward. Okay, min-max difference. Given an array of integers, return the difference between the maximum and the minimum element. You can assume the array will have 2 or more elements in it. Okay. So here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the answer is 4 because it's 5 minus 1. Here you've got 16 because 31 minus 15, the maximum minus the minimum is 16. Here we've got 200 because 100 minus negative 100 is 200. Okay, so here we're going to int. So what I'll do here is I'll assume that the minimum value in the array is equal to the first element in there, or I could assume it's equal to a very small number or a very big number. But it's much easier if I just assume that the biggest thing or the smallest thing in the array is the very first item. It's probably not, but once we disprove that it's not, we can change it. So now we have to go through every item in the list. So for int I is equal to 0, I is less than the array.length, I plus plus. Notice how the arrays have dot length with no parentheses and strings have dot length with parentheses. Array I, so int, so the ith number is, so we get the ith number out of the array, and now we have to check if it's the minimum, what the minimum and the maximum are. So if max is greater, so if num is greater than the maximum element, right? If we're bigger than the biggest item we found so far, well, then we need to make number our new maximum. And if number is smaller than the smallest number we've found so far, min is equal to number. And you could do an else if here probably, and it really wouldn't change much. So now we've found the minimum, we've found the maximum, and now we need to return the difference. So return max minus min. Biggest item minus the smallest item. Okay, swap ends. So given an array of two integers, modify the array such that the first and last elements are swapped, right? This is kind of an easier version of what you had to do in sorting. You don't have to actually sort anything, you just had to, but one part of the sorting thing was you had to use the swap method. So I'm asking you basically, do you remember how to swap two things, right? So you've got 1 and 5 swapping. In this one, you've got 15 and 28 swapping, and you've got -1 and 100 swapping over here, and none of the other items swap. Right? This is also like the reverse method, except you don't have to keep going. This is just simply, can you swap two things in an array? So public, and remember, oh, and this was a mistake here having an int. I don't know why I said to have an int here. It should be a void. Okay, public void swap ends. So now, so this really won't do too much. I don't have to iterate through the array because I'm just swapping two positions. So int temp is equal to, so we're going to store the item in index 0, okay? And then we're going to replace the item in index 0 with the item in the last item in the array. So what's the last item in the array? It is located at array.length -1. I mean, and if doing this notation you really don't like it, you could create int last index, right, if you needed to, is equal to array.length -1, and then do last index over there. And then what we need, so we overwrote the value that was stored in index 0, and now we're going to take the value at the last index, and we aren't going to store what was index 0 in there because that just got changed. Instead, we're going to, we stored it somewhere else. We stored it in temp. That's all you need to do for this one. All right. Write a method called the last three characters. And I like this one a lot too because it's a bit tougher. There's a bit more to think about. Write a method called the last three characters which accepts a string and returns the last three characters of a string. If there are less than 3 characters of a given string, just return the string. So hello, you return yo. A returns A. I've got a bad feeling about this, returns his. Right? The last 3 characters of each, of any string. Okay? Okay? So the first thing I need to figure out is, right, it said that if it's less than 3 characters long, right, then I just, sorry, if it's, let's say, if they are less than 3 characters, sorry, if there are less than 3 or less characters in the string, right, just return the string. I think I meant to write if there are 3 characters or less in the string, just return the string, but point being that basically if there are 3 characters in the string, right, the last 3 characters are the only 3 characters, so return that. And if there's less, I said just return the string. So if s.length is equal to, is less than or equal to 3, we're done. Return s. Otherwise, we need to find out what the last three characters are, right? Okay, so we know that the last character, what index is, so we know from the last, we can actually use the last problem a bit here. We know the last index, right? If it's of size n, it's going to be, then the last index is n minus 1, right? So if we've got a 10 character string, then the last character is going to be at index 9. The second to last character is going to be at 8, and the third to last character is going to be at 7, right? If it's 10 long. So the last character is at index minus 1. The last character is at the length minus 1. The second to last is at length minus 2, and the third to last is at length minus 3. So there's a couple ways to do this. The first is you could, do like s dot. You could concatenate the string together. So plus s dot caret at s dot length minus 3 So you don't actually have to iterate through anything here. Plus, minus 2 plus minus 1, right? But that's a bit long, and that's a lot of writing, right? The third to last character glued together with the second to last character glued together with the last character, right? Instead, what we can use is we can use substring again. S dot substring, right? And you need a start point and an end point. Actually, but if you exclude the end point, it goes to the end of the array. So we just need to know where the last three characters start at, and they start at s dot length minus 3. Right? Last character is at minus 1. Second to last character is at minus 2. Third to last character is at minus 3. So this simple solution, this is a very simple solution for a 10-point problem. It just requires you to think about it a bit, right? Sorry, for a 7-point problem on this one. Okay. So as far as 2D arrays are concerned, you're not going to get anything more difficult than this, which is write a method called sum of 2D, which takes in a two-dimensional array of integers and returns the sum of all the integers in the array of integers. Okay. So for int I, so what we need to do is, since we're summing this up, we need an int sum equal to 0. So now we iterate through every item in the array of arrays. So we have to go through each row, and then for each row we have to go through each column. So int. So you can use I and j. I'm going to use row and column here to be more explicit. So for each row, so for int row equals 0. Row is less than a dot length. One thing I forgot over here, up top, I'm sure that you might make this mistake as well. Parentheses for strings. Okay, it's a dot length, row plus plus. Okay. And now we have to go iterate through all the columns. So int col. So for each row, I want to go through all the columns. So row column is equal to 0. Col is less than a dot that particular row length. So however many items are in that row. Column plus plus. Common mistake would be to write row plus this there. Then sum plus equals a row col. There are a couple other ways to do this. You can use the for each loops to do this one, but that's it. Right? This isn't much harder than this isn't much, the problem you had to do for homework wasn't much harder than this, right? Which was add two 2D arrays together. So let's go on to the next one. write a method called bigger 2D, which accepts two two-dimensional arrays and returns the bigger one. And an array of arrays is bigger than another one if the sum of all the integers in it are bigger than the sum of all the integers in the other. In other words, we just solved how to sum them up over here, and now we're just saying, all right, tell me the sum of which one is the sum of 2D for which one is bigger, right? So I'm totally going to use that to make this like free 7 points. So bigger 2D int A int B so int size A. And what am I returning? I think I'm returning the integer array that's bigger. So int size A is equal to sum 2D, right? I just wrote that, so no reason why I can't use that, of A. Int size B is equal to sum 2D of B. And generally on exams, I'll tell you can call the other method, but in a practice exam, you know, I might want you to try to find that out on your own. So you've got int 2D. So now we've counted how big the A and B's are. All right. Now, if size A is greater than size B, return A. Otherwise, else, you can put an else here. You don't technically need it, but it looks easier and more symmetric, so why not? Return B, right? I didn't specify what to do if the sizes were equal, so I guess you can figure that one out on your own or ask me, but whatever. I didn't really think of that when I was writing the problem. All right, so after that, so these were all the problems I initially had on the practice exam, like when I initially gave it out. And then I had a couple, like one on the initial practice exam when I gave it in other semesters. I typically had a bunch of problems related to objects. One basically where you would write a triangle, right, object, which isn't too hard, but you already have enough to study for, I feel, with this one. So I just simply up to this point up to page 10 is a more representative sample of like the number of problems you would have. And so I've included a bunch of extra problems from CodingBat on this that I thought were, and by bunch I mean I think 1, 2, 3 extra problems on here, right? Just so you could get extra practice. So let's take a look at one of them. So this one's called Is Everywhere from CodingBat, and I gave you the source code because, I'm not going to copy and paste it without sourcing. We'll say a value is everywhere in the array if for every pair of adjacent elements in the array, at least one of the pairs is in that value. Return true if the given value is everywhere in the array. So we're asking if 1 is everywhere in this array. This pair has 1. Sorry, so for these two guys, 1 is in that pair. For these two guys, 1 is in the pair. And for these two guys, 1 is in the pair. Okay? For these two, now for 2, 2 is in this first pair, 2 is in the second pair, but 2 is not in the third pair, so we return false. Here, 1 is in this pair, 1 is in this pair, 1 is in this pair, 1 is not in this pair, so we return false. So, so everybody kind of understand the context for this problem. We're checking to basically make sure we're checking every single pair and seeing if this value is in that pair. So the first thing is that since we're checking pairs, right, we want to check this pair, this pair, this pair, and then you get to the last item, right? If you're iterating like for int I, look at the thing after me, right? But once you get to this guy, you might go, oh, I can't go any further and so I get an array out of bounds exception. So there's two approaches to do it. One is to start from index 1 and look at the guy to your left, and the other approach is to start from index 0 and look at the guy to your right until you get to the, but you stop once you get to the second to last item. So let's start at 1 and then look to your left. Int I is equal to 1, I is less than nums dot length. I plus plus. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's go and get the left. So I'm just going to simply make this a bit easier to read rather than like using the indices like it really wants me to. So I'll make it a bit unreadable first. So first, if the current item I'm looking at is the value, right? If the first item in the pair is the value, or the item to the left of my pair, so that is my value. Well then, sorry. Let's see. So if that's the case, well then that's what I'm looking for, right? And really in that case I don't want to do anything. But if it's not that case, I'd like to return false. So that looks, and if I get through the entire array, I'm going to return true. That doesn't necessarily look that great though, because I've got an if with that statement. So instead I might want to flip this around a bit more logically. So if the left value, if the value to the right is not equal to this, and the value to the left isn't equal to that, so if either of them are not equal to this, return false. And that's really all you need for that one. We could make it a bit easier to read by saying like, by basically doing something like this: int right. So the right value of the pair is equal to array I, and put like if the right value is not equal to the value, and so on and so forth. But there's really not too much of a need. And we don't have to worry about going out of bounds because we're not looking to the right, we're always looking to the left, and we're starting at index 1, so we're not going to go back out of bounds the other way. Okay, next. Okay, given a string, return the number of digits 0 to 9 that appear in the string, ignoring all the other characters. Return 0 if there's no digits in the string. Note, character is digit char. Test if one of the characters, 0, 1 through 9, is, so basically it tests if it's a digit. And integer.parsing converts a string to an integer, right? So sum of digits AA, 1B, C2, D3 gives us 6 because the sum of all the digits in there is 6. 1, 1, 3, 3, 8, and then chocolate, which has no digits, we get 0. So here we're going to have to iterate through this character by character. So let's go ahead and have an int sum is equal to 0, and then we'll return the sum at the end because guess what? It's another, one of those problems. Int. So now for int. So for int I is equal to 0, I is less than string.length, I plus plus, char is equal to, char is equal to str dot char at, so we get the ith character, so we go through and we get each character now. Okay, so now so let's use a bit of that information that it gave us. Let's test if it's a digit. And we can use that using character dot is digit to test if it's a digit or not. So if that returns true, then it's a digit. In which case, we want to add it to the sum. But we can't just say sum plus equals character, because remember, the character is an ASCII value, so we would be adding something like in the 70s to our sum. So instead, we have to turn it into an integer, and we really don't know how to do that. So instead, what we might need to do is, but it says we can use string.parseInt, so we need this to be a string. So there's a couple ways to do that. We can use integer.parseInt to turn that into an integer. But we need a string in there. So there are a couple ways to do that. The first is do C plus, turn it into a string that way by concatenating with the string. Another way to do it is str.substring. It starts at I and only has that. So this is a substring operation that grabs only the ith character, right? So there's a couple different ways to do it. And that's all. And if it's not a digit, we don't do anything to it. We just go on to the next one. Okay. And so last problem on the practice is given an array of positive ints, return a new array of length count that contains the first even numbers from the original array. The original array will have at least count even numbers in it. Okay? So you've got, here, return a new array of count containing the first two even numbers from this array. So you've got 2, 4, and 8. So now so we grab 2 and we grab 4. Here we grab, we have 3. So we grab 2, 4, and 8, and we grab all the even numbers. 3, we grab 6, 2. The even numbers here are 6, 2, 4, and 8. So we want to grab the first 3 even numbers, which are 6, 2, and 4. Now we can use the break statement here to break out of a loop, which I've mentioned very briefly in this class. But let's see. But this one's actually, I can see how this is a complicated one. So the first thing we need to do is, create our array to hold our even numbers. To hold our count even numbers. So a new int count, and we'll return evens. Now 4. So now the question is, do we iterate through count, or do we iterate through nums? So do we iterate through our evens, or do we iterate through nums? Because this is going to present because the interesting challenge here is like, if we go, so you're thinking, why am I pausing here, right? If I have int I should just iterate through, each of the even numbers. So, right? So for instance, for each integer num in nums, right, something like that, just going through all of them, right? Well, what do I do? If num if num mod 2, that's how if I tell it's even, is equal to 0, I put it in the array. Well, what array index should I put it at? Well, let's see. Because you kind of need to go through the count array as well. Sorry, the evens array as well. The solution I'm thinking of right here is to have basically an int current index is equal to 0 out here. And once we find an even number, we say evens current index is equal to the number, right, to store that number. And then we do current index plus plus. Okay? But this will now go through all the even numbers. So if we hit, and so now basically if we read 3 even numbers and counted only 3 and we get to a 4th even number, we're going to try to put it into an even number into an index that doesn't exist. Does that make sense? Everybody see what I'm getting at? With the code I have right now, it will fail the test on this one because it'll go, okay, it will fail the test on the first one because it'll say, okay, put 2 into the index 0, put 4 into index 1, put 8 into index 2, but index 2 isn't going to exist. Index 2 isn't going to exist because the array is only of size 2. So let's say if num, so we can do this without a break. So if num mod 2 equals 0 and current index is less than count, right? And now if current index is equal to count, right? If we filled up, if we found n items, so if we found count number of even items, we aren't going to go beyond that, right? Even if we find an even number, because we found enough even numbers to fill up our array already, we won't go beyond it, and that will solve the problem for us. So it's a bit of an unorthodox solution. You can't just throw a double loop in here and hope for the best. You actually have to think about it and think about the problems that will arise from this. So questions, now that I've gotten to the end, before I go back to the beginning to those code reading problems. Yes? Like the solution for it? Yeah. To the sum digits, I'll get them. There we go. Oh, that was a mistake on my part, right? I'm not infallible. They called it nums, and I almost always call my arrays R, so it should be nums. Good catch. There we go. Now they're both on the screen. And I think definitely the last one is harder than stuff you'll find on the exam, but all right, other questions? Yes? Oh, yes, of course. You're allowed to bring a cheat sheet. Okay? So one page, so just like the last exam, 1 page, front and back. Let's see, did I even spell it out? Did I spell it out on the practice exam? I did not, but yes, you're allowed a page of notes, front and back, standard, either letter or A4, depending on, what notebooks you tend to carry with you or what paper you tend to print. They're relatively the same size, so they can be handwritten or they can be typed. They could be microfleche if you need to, if you're getting really fancy and need to bring in one of those eyepieces and read them. But at that point, I think you're losing the benefit of doing the preparation of notes, right? One thing do not recommend, because this is a recipe for failure, in my opinion, is it's okay to put your previous to write your previous programs on the exam, or things from the practice exam on previous programs on the exam, but previous programs on your cheat sheet, or programs from the practice exam on the cheat sheet. But if you expect to get the right answer by just copying verbatim the problem from your cheat sheet onto the practice exam, we're just going to wonder what the heck the code is talking about, because it's not going to make any sense if you try to copy it verbatim, right? You got to actually understand the stuff. I see that a lot in 2168 as well, when we've got a student who's falling behind because they don't get the assignment. So yeah. So that's what's going. So that's what I've got for you guys right now. Let me go ahead and check the code reading portion of this. So the code reading portion of this. Oh, come on. Code reading portion. So let's see what we did. We created so we created a new global. We created an array called 1, 2, 3, and we ask it to twiddle on 3. So yeah, this will not be on the exam because you haven't learned about objects and the way that would work yet. This question has to do with, do you understand how this works? So these questions would be along the lines of something we definitely ask on the final exam because they're highly confusing and annoying. And they can be answered with a multiple choice question. So we can make a multiple choice, which makes it easy for us to grade. I personally prefer a lot more code writing because I feel that gets a better representation of your skill, because it's so easy to make a lot of mistakes during a final. So don't worry about the code reading portion. Okay, most of the problems will be can you code? All right, so let me go ahead and stop this recording, and I'm going to upload it to my. We still have like 15 minutes left in class, right? So give me a second.